Alright guys, today we're going to be doing a knife build video. First one of those. So starting off, I've got a design here that I'm going to be wanting to use. Just sketched it onto a piece of paper. Going to cut that out with a little razor blade I have there. Looks good. I'm actually going to be trying to do two knives on this blank that I've got today. So we'll cut out both the designs that I want. These were the original designs that I thought would work on the blade blank, but I hadn't measured it correctly, so we ended up having to change that a little bit later, as you will see. So initial fit up, trying to get both these knives on out of the same blank, just was not working too well for me. So I went back to the drawing board, traced out my blank once again, and we're going to try and get two knives to fit on this blank. So just pulled out a knife that I liked the way it feels, good handle shape, thought that I might be able to squeeze two out of that handle. Just trying to use a protractor, get good consistent blade angles and blade curve lines, I guess you would call it. But once again, fail. So third time might be the charm. Sketch out the blank again, go back to the original design, just trying to make it a little bit beefier this time, a little bit better purchase in the hand. So sketch the blade, just try and get something good shape that I like, that'll work. Just refining the shape a little bit. This part was a lot harder than I thought it would be, just freehand drawing a knife, but it's definitely something to give a try. It's better than if you don't have computer programming to, make a knife on your computer. Freehand isn't as bad as it seems. So we'll cut that out. Same old story, X-Acto knife again. That feels pretty good. A little bit bigger than the original one. And we're going to go ahead and trace that out so we can make two of those. Give it everything nice and straight, good lines. That'll transfer well to your steel. And go ahead and cut that one out as well. Again, just trying to keep all the lines straight and make sure everything's going to transfer over well. Just take your time. Now we got two knives that are going to look really good on the steel, fit well, have plenty of space to cut out. And for some reason I forgot how I had them on there, so this took me a while to figure it back out, but I got it there. Alright, now we're just going to scribe in some lines just in case the paper comes off while we're trying to cut these out, which it did. And we're off to the angle grinder, just cutting out a basic profile of the knife here. Just want to come in, get as much of the excess steel stock off as you can. The easiest way to do that, once you get down real close to the profile of the knife, is to cut in a bunch of little lines, going vertically, and then come in horizontally and take out each little piece individually. So just continue to cut that up right there. This would be a lot easier if I had a bench vise, but I do not. So I'm just working with some wood clamps on a old tool bench that I have. Come in with the angle grinder, and there's the first one. And like I said before, come in, make your vertical cuts, and then come across. It makes it a lot easier. My dad decided to come out and see what all the noise was. And now we'll switch back to the grinding disc just to clean everything up and get it pretty close to the rough shape that we're going to want before we take it to the belt sander. And we're on to the belt sander now, just making everything nice and smooth and true, getting rid of all the jagged edges, making it nice and flush, ready to move on to the next step. So just take your time once again, make sure everything's nice and flat, nice and smooth. Make sure all your angles are correct, all your blade curves and your geometry of the knife, make sure it feels good in your hand. Using the little contact wheel on the top there, using the flat platen, the slack part, all parts of the belt sander are useful in knife making. This is just a cheap belt sander from Harbor Freight too. You can get much fancier than this. And we'll get it where we like it there. And that's going to be good right there. I had a whole portion right here where I was going to talk about what I was doing with the knife, but that didn't work out too well. And I was going to use an angle jig to put in the original bevel, and for some reason I could not get it to work. It just was not happening. It was the first time I tried to use an angle jig, So decided that the best way was going to be to use a filing jig, which I've set up here. And as you can see right now, I'm on my phone just trying to find some good angles, good reference guide on all the blade forums and knife forums online. But basically, I've just got an eye bolt with a piece of conduit, my hose clamped a file to the end of the conduit, and we're just going to file away to our center line. You mark your center line by putting some Sharpie on the blank and then scratching a line in the middle with a drill bit. That's the same diameter. So there's a quick view of the knife with the bevel guide, and then the knife that I'm showing you right there is the knife that I ruined on the bevel jig. And now it's time to get our scales. So this is a purple Kieranite, I believe, or micarta, I can't remember which. We're just going to cut that out with a hacksaw real quick. This actually was pretty difficult and it took a decent amount of time. I would recommend if you have a bandsaw or any kind of power saw to use that. It's a lot easier. Just trying to get it clamped up to where I can cut out the rest of the profile before I could take it to the belt sander. And cut off that extra piece there. Vacuum up all the excess because I am working inside at this point. Just keep sawing away. That's one thing about making a knife this way without a lot of power tools is you're going to have a lot of hand working time. You're just going to have to get used to it and get good at it. So I'm going to put the blank on the scale and get a rough outline of where we're going to want the scales to be sanded and cut out to. Just take a little Sharpie there. And that'll be good enough. And now we're time to take it out back to the belt sander. Get everything down to those lines. This stuff makes a mess. Definitely wear a respirator. Definitely have some kind of filtration system. Leave the door open to your shed like I did. And just go to town on it. Like I said, once again, using all parts of the belt sander. And I wasn't able to show the heat treat. I forgot my camera for that part. But basically heated it up with the oxyacetylene torch till it was cherry red, and then quenched it in canola oil. It's an easy way to heat treat, and then tempered it for 25 minutes for 2 cycles at 450 degrees. And here we're just getting both the scales shaped up evenly. Make sure they're the exact same profile. Put your pins in, drill your pinholes, put your pins in, keep them held together, and make sure they're at the same profile. Just take everything down nice and flush. You're going to want to have a lot of belts because this stuff will eat up your belts and just clog them up with debris, and they just will not sand good. So, looks pretty good there. All right, back inside. Check our fit with our pins and the knife and the scales. It's a good fit there. I'm happy with that. So we're going to mark off where we want our handles to come to, and take them back out to the belt sander and knock those little edges down, get the profile pretty much where we want it before glue up. Just sand, sand, sand. Right, that looks pretty good there. And now we're going to take a surface conditioning belt, which is basically just Scotch-Brite on a belt, and we're going to get off all the residue from heat treating the knife. Basically just get it to a nice satin finish for glue up. These belts work amazing. They leave a great finish. I actually ended up leaving this as the final finish on the knife just because it's such a good little satin finish. It puts a really nice grain in the knife. I think this is a ultra fine or a fine. I can't remember which. But there we go. I am going to hand sand a little bit because I originally thought I was going to be taking this knife to a mirror finish, but that ended up not being the case. But I ended up putting the hand sanding in here anyway, just to show you. I use Windex. I've watched some videos from Jeremy at Simple Little Life explaining why he uses Windex when he sands his knives, and it actually does seem to leave a better finish and to be a lot cleaner to work with than water, so that's what I'm using here. Just using a little block there, that little sanding block I've got to give a rigid backing to the sandpaper and make it a lot easier to cut. And here we're just going to take some sandpaper on a piece of granite plate there and rough up the scales and the tang of the knife, get everything ready for glue up. It's pretty aggressive sandpaper. You want to let your epoxy bite. I think it's about 80 grit. So rough up the tang and wipe everything down. And here we're going to clean everything up with a little bit of acetone. You can use lacquer thinner, just any kind of solvent, mineral spirits, anything like that. Just get everything nice and clean before glue up. Make sure there's no residue or dust left on there. Put some tape over your blade so that no epoxy gets on it. And we're going to be ready to start gluing these scales up. So you're going to want to wear gloves on this process so the epoxy doesn't get on your hands. I'm using a 2-part fast setting Gorilla Glue epoxy. It's just what I had laying around. Mix some of that up. Make sure you slather on all the pieces, pins, scales. Put your knife in there. Get everything fitted up. I used some wax paper to make sure my clamps didn't stick at this point. Clamp it all up. Make sure it's nice and tight. Wipe off any of the excess that might have squeezed out onto the blade there. And let it dry for about 24 hours. Come back, and here comes the fun part. It's nice and dry, and now it's time to sand it down and make it into a knife. So sand your pins down flush. I'm using a pretty aggressive belt here. It's about 38 grit just to knock those pins off because I left them pretty long. Make sure everything's nice and flat up to the scales. And now we're going to do a combination of hand sanding and sanding on the belt sander. This part took a very long time. Just make sure you've got the patience for it. Take your time. Make sure it feels good in your hand. There's no right or wrong way to do this part. It's just whatever you personally like in terms of feel of a knife handle. I've got my little vacuum filtration there, duct taped, just trying to keep the dust to a minimum. But just sand using a bunch of sandpaper. You'll be surprised. You'll use a very, very large amount of sandpaper. Using everything right here from 80 to 100 grit just to get those initial deep scratches from the belt sander off the handle. Get all that epoxy off, clean everything up, make sure everything's nice and smooth. This part did take a while. This was probably, I would say this was the longest part of the process right here, other than filing in the bevels. Just sand, get everything feeling good. That's one of the biggest things that I've found so far with knife making is just make it the way you like it, because in the end of the day, if it's for you, you're the one who's going to be using it, and make it feel comfortable for you. Don't listen to what anyone else has to say. And another word of advice, a bench vise would have made this process so much easier, but I just unfortunately do not have a bench vise right now, so I just made do with a little jerry-rigged clamp system there. And we're just going to keep sanding and keep sanding. You can see there's still some pretty deep scratches there on the side of the handle that I'm just trying to work out very gradually and just make a nice round profile, very comfortable in the hand. The stuff doesn't sand quite as good as wood would. Say that 5 times fast. But it does sand down, and you'll eventually get there. I definitely recommend hand sanding at this point, unless you've got a lot of different kinds of belt sanders, because the belt sanders can really take material off in a hurry at this point, and you just want to finesse it, take your time, feel what you're doing, and make it feel nice, and don't get carried away. Getting pretty close here. I believe I took everything, final grit on the sandpaper was 400 grit on this knife. Shape the end of the handle there. Just make sure it's got a nice feel in the hand. Make sure it's going to look good. You can see the pile of sandpaper there in the corner. You will use a lot of sandpaper if you want to get into knife making. That's just the way it is. One word of advice I would also have is, if you have the money, buy good quality sandpaper. The sandpaper I have here, it was not good quality. You can tell that it's all ripped up. It did not stay together well. And yeah, just if you've got the money, buy some higher quality sandpaper. But the knife's pretty good there. Sanded it to 400 grit, like I said. It's time to take the tape off. And I made a mistake with the tape up of the blade. I got some of the painter's tape there underneath the scales during the glue up, so we're just going to cut that out with a razor blade. And now we're going to wipe everything down with some acetone once again. get it all nice and clean, finish getting off that tape. And now we're going to take the scales to a buffing wheel. This is a buffing wheel with a little bit of gray compound in it, and it gives them a pretty nice finish. It's not a shiny finish, but it definitely brings out all the character in the scales themselves. And here I am buffing the blade because I thought I was going to take this knife to a mirror polish, but I ended up taking it back out and just leaving it at a satin finish using the surface conditioning belt. But buff it up, make it look nice, just get it to where you like it. That's just a plain cotton buffing wheel, no compound on that one, just to finish it up. And there it is. Time to make a sheath. So this is purple Kydex. I believe it's 1/8 inch Kydex. Just going to score it with a razor blade there and snap it off. It's an easy way to work with this material. Cut that in half and break that, and that'll be ready to go. So now we're going to tape up the blade. We're going to use, I think I used 3 layers of blue painter's tape just to give a little bit of space between the Kydex and the blade so that the blade's not scratching every time it goes in and out of the sheath. And cut that off to make it nice and tight to the blade. And that's going to work for us right there. Just clean everything up, make sure there's no excess hanging off that's going to interfere with the sheath coming together. And that'll do it. So now here we're going to run a dry fit, just make sure everything's going to work. I ran my toaster oven at 250 degrees, put the pieces of Kydex in there until they curled up on their own, and then we put it in the press. This is just some Kydex pressing foam that I got off eBay for $18. Glued it to 2 pieces of MDF and then just clamped it together, and it worked okay. I'm definitely going to make a better design, but it worked good for this first one. So now we are going to mark off where we're going to put our rivets, center punch those marks just to give the drill bit something to bite into. And we're going to be using a brad point drill bit, 1/4 inch. Drill out all those holes right there. Make sure your eyelets fit. Kydex drills out really easy, so just take it slow. Make sure you don't. Make sure you keep your drill straight and don't get too carried away. All right, clean that up. Make sure that your eyelets are going to fit in every hole. And this is just a little chamfering tool, hand reamer. Just knock off all those little burrs. Break it apart, clean it up. Take the tape off your blade of your knife. And this is a little rivet setter that I got off Amazon for like $40. Just going to hit it. You place your eyelet in there and then put the die in your eyelet and then just hit it down with a hammer, nice and tight, and it works really well. So set all those rivets, and we're coming to the home stretch, guys. So I took it out and shaped it up on the belt grinder, just made everything look nice, look the way I wanted it, and clean up the inside edges a little bit with sandpaper. And then we're going to buff the edges of the Kydex, and it kind of makes them look like they're one piece. There's no seam if you take them to a buffing wheel like this, and it looks pretty good. All right, and we're pretty much done right there, guys. So here it is. Here's the knife. I think it turned out pretty good for my first knife. I love the purple scales there. They look really nice, I think. It's got a nice tight fit in the sheath. Feels good in the hand. I sharpened it on my belt sander using a 400 grit belt and a leather stropping belt. And yeah, I think it turned out pretty good. Like I said, I used the Scotch-Brite belt to leave a satin finish, and it's got a nice tight retention in the sheath there. A little awkward thumb. But anyway, yeah, thanks for watching.